Your first playthrough of Baldur's Gate 3 will almost always be the most fun. The feeling of progression, meaningful decision making, and exploration is just perfect, and there's much more to discover. But on your second playthrough, you start realizing that some of the options you thought you had before were actually just railroading you to the same conclusion.
Spoiler alert!
Sure, you can have your evil playthrough and your good playthrough and see vastly different dialogues, but after that you're going to be trying to find much more niche interactions that take you 50 hours or more of gameplay to find. And once you've learned how the combat works, what builds are most powerful, running through this with a 4-man party, even on tactician mode, may not be the most engaging experience anymore. That's why I tried out the Lone Wolf Challenge, which is basically just using one character, and for the most part I've gotten to Act 3 on a Warlock and a Monk, which was a fun experience. But I just get bored of doing the same overpowered strategy, which usually involves abusing the same mechanic over and over to even be able to succeed, because I've got limited options with only one build to work with. I've only completed the game once so far on my first 4-man party playthrough, but have had many different playthroughs. So I'm missing out on those promised 14,000 endings. The reality is that the endings aren't what you want to see, it's the journey. So I wanted a more interactive way to play the game, and to me this is with not 4, not 1, but 2 characters.
I was ready to go this alone, but maybe sticking with the herd isn't such a bad idea.
A duo composition not only allows you to play towards some synergy between your characters, but it also allows you to have another companion to witness more of the dialogue and story related to them. Many dialogues and cutscenes will have your other companions interject or influence your decisions, and it's a shame to go through the entire game with only one character, because the character you play as usually shows the least amount of personality, because the game lets you project yourself on them the most. In other words, playing as Karlach gives you the least amount of voice acting for Karlach, but playing with Karlach in your party will give you a lot more dialogue and voice acting from her. I'm not doing anything here. This is all automatic. She's burning the place up. Also, sometimes it just gets lonely and it's nice to have some company, but maybe not all of those thirst lords piling on top of you at the same time.
Shit.
However, with 2 players, the game will still be somewhat easy to someone using the best strats and builds, so there needs to be some trade-off to maintain the challenge. So of course, I went for a hardcore Iron Man rule set, or essentially permadeath. If you get a game over screen, your run is over. You don't reload the last save file. That's it. In Divinity Original Sin 2, there was a difficulty higher than Tactician, and it was Honor Mode, which essentially allowed you only one save slot and deleted it on game over. This was for the most part good. It gave you a lot of flexibility to play the game how you want, but therefore still abuse save scumming. While there is no Honor Mode in Baldur's Gate 3, we can simulate it with our own custom rules. No mods are needed, but if you want them, you can as you wish. Already this is going to put off many people because losing the 50 hours or more time investment into your current run would feel really bad, but remember, this isn't suggested for your first or second or even 5th playthrough. To take on this kind of risk, you'll want a lot more knowledge and strategies that simply come through experience. This is for those who want a fresh new way of playing. The risk of permadeath isn't the only thing though. There needs to be some extra rules to prevent you from optimizing the fun out of the game, like save scumming and infinite resource gains that trivialize decision making. And I've been playing this game mode for a bit and have come up with my own rules set, which I'll go over in a bit. But first, let's highlight why a hardcore duo run is, in my opinion, the best way to play the game. Not only does having a second companion give you much more story, but it also removes a lot of the random RNG that will give you a game over. Let's face it, this game is complete bullshit sometimes. It'll kill you with jumping bugs, enemies will critically hit you 3 times in a row while you critically miss 3 times in a row, and if your one character misses a saving throw on a CC, like hold person, that's an instant game over. Having a second companion means that if something like this happens, you've still got an escape plan or a way to revive, so it's much more forgiving and allows you to actually take on these enemies in a more fair fight. If you tried to solo in a situation where it's possible to instantly die to one CC spell, you'd basically need to kill them all in one turn or abuse resetting combat, which by all means, if you like doing that the entire game, there's a multi-class called Gloomstalker Assassin for you, but not everyone wants to play a sneak archer every time, so duo hardcore is simply the better way in my opinion, because it allows you to play and explore all of the classes as you progress through a somewhat risky but more immersive journey.
A pleasure.
The first rule I made was no infinite resource tricks. You can buy from vendors every day, but doing a long rest when you don't need to just to reset vendors would be, in my opinion, an infinite resource. Although it does cost money to buy things from a vendor, money is easily obtained and replenished for stealing in a similar infinite manner, like Volo, who will replenish a decent amount of supplies and gold every time you sleep, and he won't permanently leave you no matter how many times he catches you with your hands in his pockets. This to me seems like an infinite resource. Use your common sense here. Sometimes learning how the game works and abusing it can be more fun, but abusing game-breaking bugs might not be it. Decide for yourself what this line is, because cheesing your way through the game to get to the end doesn't give you anything. It's the journey that matters, and the point is to make a more engaging playthrough. Next is no barrelmancy. This means stocking up on a bunch of explosives and using them all in one spot to instantly blow up a big boss with one fire spell. This is the most overpowered thing in the game. If the environment already has explosives in it, then use them as the game intended them to be. But pulling a bunch of barrels out of your back pocket where the boss is about to spawn is a bit weird, and it removes your class identity since anyone can do this. If you want to use explosives, only use them in combat and only drop or throw one per turn or one per action point. That way enemies have a chance to fight back. Third rule is no using any companions besides your main two. There are some methods to use warding spells on your active party members with those still in your camp. This is like cheating, and when asked by your partner if you're alone, you say yes, but there's someone in the closet. Having other companions in the camp would be fine, but send them to camp and don't interact with them. Fourth rule, no Wither's Revival. You need to buy a scroll of Revivify to revive your ally. Not only does this make you think more about your actions because scrolls can be a somewhat finite resource, it also makes it riskier when you're losing a fight. You can't just go out of combat when one of your party members dies, then go to camp and revive them at Withers for a full reset. You need to make a rescue attempt and then recover and then engage again. It feels more meaningful and realistic. If you die to falling down a chasm, your spirit can still be revived, so there shouldn't be any need to use Withers to prevent your save file from being soft locked. But if that did happen, I guess it'd be okay. Next rule, no reloading. You can save whenever you want in case the game crashes, but the only time you're allowed to load is when you fire up the game. This means you need to be prepared to fight at any time. You can't just reload if you fail a persuasion check to bypass a fight through dialogue. This creates more interesting situations and means you'll need to have a backup plan, because you can't just reload to get your meta strategy to work. You need to either perform perfectly or live with your mistakes and learn to adapt. And if you get a game over, no excuses. Delete the save file and start over. The last rule is regarding fast travel. You can only use the sigils to fast travel if you're already at the location of one of those sigils. I don't think it should be disallowed because sometimes you do need to travel halfway across a map that is already cleared. It's just tedious travel time, but at the same time, you could be in a dangerous situation and you'd need to come up with a plan to escape, but fast travel would just solve that issue immediately. There are some areas in the game that already prevent fast travel, but obviously not all. Only being able to fast travel at a sigil means you need to already be at a safe location to use it, which prevents any easy solutions, and it also just makes more sense regarding the lore. Those rules seem to be good enough for now. Remember that Baldur's Gate 3 is a game about immersion and problem solving, but there are so many broken mechanics that can trivialize that aspect of the game, and deep down inside some of us just can't help but optimize the fun out of the game, and having self-control can be difficult without any hard and fast guidelines. If you have any necessary compulsion to save scum, or use the most broken barrelmancy strategies, then this obviously isn't for you. Also, if some of these rules don't sound fun for you, change them how you want. Add some more if it's too easy, and leave some suggestions in the comments on how you would change this rule set to be more fun. I'm just sharing this to hopefully inspire others to find new ways to play the game. Until Larian comes out with an official honor mode, I think this is the best way to get some replay value out of the game. So, let's start out with Karlach. I've never used her in any of my parties, so we can see how her story plays out. There will be minor spoilers since I'll be talking about my playthrough, so if you did enjoy the video so far, please like and subscribe, and I'll see you in the next one. But let's check out a new character. Apparently Karlach has an infernal engine for a heart, and we need to find out how to fix that while we figure out how to deal with the tadpole in our brains. So our heart and our brain is messed up? Things already aren't going well, but since this is a duo run, I need to find out who I want to use as my other companion. I wanted to try out a bard and barbarian composition, but none of the origin characters are bards, so I'll need to respect one of them later. But I think Astarion is a good candidate for a bard because he's very charismatic. So I go talk to Astarion and avoid being cut open by him. I don't actually think there's a way to fail this dialogue with Astarion other than deciding to fight him in combat, so we tell him to join party and move on to the Grove.
My name's Astarion.
With 2 party members, we can also play more aggressively to win fights fast enough to actually have some of the NPCs survive like Zevlor, so we have the potential to affect the story a little bit more than a solo run where you have to hide behind everything and let your allies die. Afterwards, we try to break up the fight between Zevlor and Eredin, but we take justice a little bit too seriously. I knock out Zevlor, but we aren't taking Eredin's side. It's just that Zevlor is getting off easy. Eredin has to die for his crimes, and while I was confident Astarion and I could take the 2v2, things got a little too close because early on, these dice rolls can really go either way. You gotta be careful and not all in on a 50-50. Next, I went to the mausoleum because I wanted to unlock Withers so I can respec Astarion to a full bard, since for now he's only a multi-class rogue bard. But these bandits looting the place, they're one of the hardest fights this early on, and while barrelmancy isn't allowed, I can still make use of the environment, which just so happens to already have barrels around it. If they put the barrels there, it isn't barrelmancy, but the bandits ended up using the barrels on me instead. Still, I could kite the bandits back through the fire, use choke points by fighting any who run ahead of their group, and use the doorway as an ambush spot, killing any who walk through. Overall, this is one of the more fun fights because of the strategic elements created by the terrain, enemy formation, environment, and our lack of having sheer numbers. I went to the final room with the skeletons, and learned that skeletons are just a bunch of bones, so they're not very heavy. So while most humanoid enemies besides gnomes are too heavy, as a barbarian I can throw skeletons at each other, and they're weak to bludgeoning damage too, so this was way too easy. Now I'm able to make Astarion a full-on bard, and we can start taking on more challenges in Act 1. I haven't yet decided what kind of alignment I want to do as well. Normally, Karlach is a pretty good character, but Astarion disapproves of most good things, so we'll need to be a bit more neutral and sometimes do some sketchy stuff.
I like these 2. All zeal and no brains.
So, to make a compromise with Astarion, we didn't immediately kill the absolute cultists. We told them to get revenge on the owlbear that killed their true soul. But the owlbear is quite a challenge even with the help from these 2 NPCs. So instead of helping them, I thought to steal the owlbear egg, which can sell for quite a bit, and let the others die. But then I realized that the mother attacks anyone who holds the egg, so I dropped the egg and ran. But that gave me a good idea. What if I send the egg through my inventory to my other party member? Will the owlbear immediately go to attack them on the other side of the room? And yup, that worked. So now Astarion is tanking, and the owlbear leaves me alone, and I get an attack of opportunity when she leaves. So whoever has the egg becomes the tank for this fight. And I never really knew this until now, and the owlbear won't do anything if they can't catch up to your egg tank. so we could just wail on her. This is the first time where I've done this fight and the absolutists actually survived, even with a 4-party group. Yes, it was a bit of a cheese method, but it didn't break any of my rules, and I think it was a pretty clever and interesting way to handle this fight, at least for this playthrough. Then I went over to the goblin camp, and we went in guns blazing just for the fun of it. I took a good 30 minutes just taking out every goblin I could outside, and there were some close moments because Astarion can't really take being focused, and eventually the goblins made their way up to us. But since goblins are also light enemies, they can be thrown off the top of the fort and take plenty of fall damage, while also helping to keep the high ground advantage. This also works inside the sanctum for holding the high ground in the rafters. Such a fun playstyle. Critical miss. So I decided I would go a Berserker Barbarian as Karlach, which basically gives you improved throwing capabilities, so you can throw weapons and other characters obviously. Don't worry Astarion, even though you sometimes compromise the run, I won't throw you out so long as you fully support me as a College of Lore Bard. So we did pretty well with this composition, and for the most part, I thought I could just solo as Karlach since barbarians are so powerful and can take quite a few hits with their resistance to physical damage. But then I started to take on some of the harder bosses in this act, like the Spider Queen, and I know what you're thinking, just knock her off. But it's not that simple, because even though I have Minor Illusion on Astarion, I don't have a ranged knockback. If I botch my opener, I can't reload, so I need a more reliable and consistent strategy. So after painstakingly clearing out as many of the spiders as I could before taking on the queen, and then having some very close encounters where I had to reset and revive Astarion, I eventually realized I had a consumable that is a ranged pull, the Void Bulb, and using some quick math, I found the right angle and sent the Spider Queen down into the Underdark. Falling damage is quite nice early on, but we won't always have this luxury, so I need to start getting some better strategies or I'm going to die. Normally you find Karlach near the Toll House, which is a bit later on than the other origin characters, but when you play as her, you don't really get a good idea of what her backstory is until you get to the Toll House. This is where the Zariel devils are pretending to be paladins of Tyr so they can hunt down Karlach and bring her back to Zariel. And when you play as Karlach, there's some different dialogue here. You can even attempt to concede and return to Zariel, but they don't believe you and attack anyway. But we handle them regardless. I also have the returning pike by now, which is a throwing weapon that returns to your hand so you can just keep throwing it. Combined with the Tavern Brawler feat, which gives you insanely high hit chance, this weapon destroys things with a ranged throwing build. Astarion helped too. Then we went to the Hag, and most players avoid replacing their eye with the Hag's eye because it's generally a detriment to their character because it gives you disadvantage on perception, but it also gives you a +1 on intimidation, and since Astarion will do our perceiving and I'm a Zariel tiefling, I have other bonuses to intimidation, so when that option arises in dialogue, I will always take the intimidation route. Fighting the Hag got pretty sketchy as well, but because Astarion landed a clutch thunder wave, which his bardic inspiration ensured the saving throw would fail, we put the Hag in the chasm. Now I know what you're thinking right now. Get the Hag's hair for the extra bonus stats. That's such a risky thing to go for, and I botched my opener and didn't land hold person on her, so I had to fight from behind, and it came to desperation place at that point since I was running out of steam. Remember, I can't reload. I have to live with my choices, and I chose to steal Mayrina's husband from her and use him as my own pet. I need all the advantages I can get, and besides, it's not like we'll see her again, right?
I thought you were going to help! I thought...
Making our way down to the Underdark, I took out the Boulette, which is no easy feat. The game started to become a lot easier because at level 5, I can use an extra attack, which means I can also throw an extra weapon, but at the same time, I lost my returning pike. It must have fallen down a chasm or something when I threw it and it didn't return to me, so I lost it forever. I can't reload. Now I need to actually collect and throw unique weapons to get value out of my Tavern Brawler trait, which actually made things more interesting because I could run out of weapons to throw, or I had to pick up the weapons I threw, which required me to sacrifice my positioning, so things got a little bit more strategic than just spamming throw. And this was around the time that I went to take on the Grim Forge. This boss has so many different strategies you can use to beat it, but they can all go terribly wrong if you mess things up, because the boss does tons of damage and I can't reload. But since I have a barbarian and a hammer, I can make use of the bludgeoning strategy and just do as much damage as possible by throwing a haste potion on both of us, putting accuracy oils on my weapon, and using Scratch and Connor as bait just so I can get a few extra turns before Karlach needs to tank damage. After thinking about this a little too hard and just ending up smashing him to death, I made my way over to the fire elemental. Although I was quite confident in this fight, I didn't prepare for it as much as Grim, so I was quite surprised when the elemental one-shotted me. I was able to revive and retreat, but before I fully committed to just letting this one fight go, I had a massive Asterion moment and ported behind it to thunderwave it off the ledge to the lower platform, and from there pelt it with attacks until it died. Now was time for Act 2, and by now Asterion had access to Haste and Restore Vitality, which I got from the College of Lore Bard level 6. You can choose 2 spells from a list of many different spells. I wanted more support, and with this setup I can Haste Karlach, so I can do 4 attacks per turn, and then Restore Vitality to use my bonus action to heal every turn, which with the helmet I got from the Grove also heals Asterion every time he heals another. So our party has a pretty robust support and striker role set up, which works very effectively, and saving Isabel from Marcus's ambush went pretty well as expected. We then went out with the Harpers to ambush the Absolute Caravan, and this fight is mostly dangerous because of the Spider Drow Karnas, but we killed all the others so quickly that we could easily overwhelm Karnas with a numbers advantage, and even though he still put up a fight, we came out victorious. We got the Tinkerbell blessing, which is really nice to get early on in Act 2 because we don't need to worry about the Shadow Curse at all, and we can go wherever we want. So we were set up for success, but I engaged the Measle ambush a bit sloppily and Astarion got garroted and pulled away from Karlach, which silences him so he can't use spells and also immobilizes him, so only Karlach can really do anything here. And these Measles have a lot of health, so trying to take them out fast enough didn't work, so I had to make a getaway, but they kept shadow stepping at me and restraining me. I tried to make one final desperation play by putting on Survival Instinct and using a potion of invisibility, but none of that worked. So Karlach and Asterion's journey ends, and we go again. Next time I know not to mess with the Measles, or at least be a bit more cautious when engaging them. So next time I decided to play as Gale. I wanted to play a wizard and maybe another barbarian with lae'zel as a wild heart barbarian. Whereas last run barbarian felt really strong, this run playing as a wizard that starts out with 8 base health, things were a bit rough. I almost got sent back to the Nautiloid by the Intellect Devourers who did 7 damage to me. So basically a one shot if they just rolled one number higher, or I didn't use a potion. Yeah, this run is cursed in more than one way. I needed to save lae'zel from some racist tieflings, but if I play too safely, she dies before she joins my party, and if I play too aggressively to save her, I can die before she's in my party, which would mean game over even if she's still alive. Despite this, I got some lucky rolls and freed lae'zel. I went to get Withers so I can respec her from a fighter to a barbarian, but of course that means going through the bandits again, and this time I'm not feeling so good. But the cursed part of this run actually became a benefit. Gale has a ticking time bomb in him, and if he dies, you get a game over if you leave him dead for 2 days. Now obviously I wouldn't leave him dead for 2 days, but while he is dead, he leaves behind a necrotic aura which deals damage to nearby characters. And I realized I can send Gale in to die and use positioning to bait enemies to stand in the necrotic aura, then once enough are dead I can go in and finish the rest with lae'zel, since Gale would be out of spell slots anyway. So the necrotic aura strategy was legit, at least this early on. But yeah, this run feels really rough and hopefully I don't die. But for now, I think that's enough for this video. If you do want to see more of my journey, you can check it out on my live stream where I'll be playing Permadeath duo runs. And if it's interesting, I'll come out with a part 2. But once again, if you like this content, support it appropriately, and I will see you all next time.